rebels in the past few years have grown powerfully. With support from Mon Cala, they've assembled a fleet. Mon Cala's issue with the Empire isn't much deeper than being distraught that they didn't put their primary shipyards at Mon Cala, but in the previous 10 years there hasn't been much reason to dislike the Empire. Orson Krennic has been elected a second time and rules benevolently. Tarkin rather resents Krennic, but obeys because he's allowed to be the ruling Moff at Eridu. Saw Gerrera and his band of terrorists have recently struck at a deep core Imperial base, killing many clone veterans and an Inquisitor. Since Saw has been out trying to cause disability in the Empire, Chancellor Krennic has tightened his grip on worlds that have shown rebellious tendencies, such as Lothal, Onderon, and Mon Cala, which are the primary planets with restrictions. Because this doesn't drastically affect deep core, mid-rim, and even outer rim worlds, the Senate agrees with the decision. On another note, the Empire has used its military efficiently by crushing all the crime families in the Outer Rim and establishing militaristic-run operations. These operations are led by high-ranking Inquisitors and are ran well, and are liked by citizens by the Outer Rim. Though it's important to note that Vader has told the Grand Inquisitor and his two apprentices, Barriss Offee and Pong Krell, that they and all those under them must obey the Moffs. It wasn't because they were to be feared, but it was because why force power when the galaxy already bends to your will? Vader, on the other hand, goes for years without being seen. Every so often he's seen venturing quietly through the Senate building, Death Star, or even Korriban. His apprentices have finished their training, but since Vader has no true threat, he's spent most of his time on Exegol, doing what he wants. Vader has built a new Sith temple and established a cloning facility, but not for himself. He's been trying to manipulate the Force to create life, but without the help of another, much like Plagueis. Well, Vader has found the path to immortality, and even how to transfer his essence from one life form to another, he has no interest. He's already become the most powerful being in the galaxy. He hasn't eaten a planet, but he also hasn't grown a ravenous hunger for the Force. He's not a wound, but a creation of the Force. And though Vader doesn't see down the path of the Jedi, he also doesn't feel the need to go out and seize power from those he already has power from. Vader's younglings are the only ones who are consistently around Vader. They have come to age and are now full-grown adults. It's been more than 20 years since he took them from the Jedi Temple. Vader knew they would crush any Jedi that showed their face, but they were working with a group of dark side users that weren't powerful enough to use the Force like the Sith. They were called the Prophets of the Dark Side. Vader was like a god to them. They built him a temple, and they built his cloning facility. Vader's cloning facility had a purpose. It wasn't for him, but for relics. Relics of the Sith. When he was seen on the Death Star, Coruscant, or Caravan, he was retrieving relics from all the Sith that he had studied. He wanted to use their remnants to bring them back. Why? Power. He could build the greatest Sith army ever. Yes, but would the greatest Sith ever try to steal his power? Yes, of course, they were Sith. Vader, though, was ready to begin his first cloning test before he received a call from Chancellor Krennic. He was rather annoyed, but answered it because, of course, he did put Krennic in power and in the place to succeed at first. Krennic told Vader that the last Jedi had been discovered, and there was someone else who worked with them. Someone who wanted revenge for a decade. General Grievous was now fighting for the rebels. Vader thought this would be a waste of time, but he could finally finish what Palpatine couldn't, what no Sith had ever done. Vader didn't want to live forever, but he did want his legacy to be that of the most powerful Sith in history. Vader departed Exegol and returned to his flagship. There he was greeted by several Sith he had trained, but some he had never met. Vader decided that he would let his apprentices from Exegol join him, though he was very, very wary of the prophets of the dark side that remained behind. A true Sith army was being dispatched to Lothal, where there was a massive rebel fleet amassed. Vader's fleet emerged from hyperspace. Grand Admiral Thrawn was told to join the battle, as the Death Star would be dropped out of hyperspace near Lothal shortly. The space battle began, with Vader's Super Star Destroyers shelling Mon Calamari flagships. They were caught off guard. There was nothing that could really stop Vader and Thrawn's fleet combined. Vader communicated to Thrawn to begin the ground deployment. Vader entered a fighter, and his apprentices and Inquisitors got into their advanced TIEs and guided the Imperial shuttles to the ground. Skywalker decided for some fun, spinning and broke off from the group of Imperials. This was the fight the rebellion needed to win, but they were outmatched. Vader tore through the shields of cruisers and obliterated squadrons of fighters. Vader was unstoppable. He was the best pilot in the galaxy. All of his powers were so amplified that he was literally unstoppable, and maybe even that arrogance got the best of him. On the ground, AT-AT walkers landed, and they were followed closely by AT-AT walkers. The rebels had several hovering tanks, and they met the walkers with stiff resistance. It was an all-out war. Veers led from a personalized AT-AT, while Thrawn led on an assault on the ground from the city. Barriss and Pong kept close to Thrawn, while Vader's apprentices ravaged through rebel forces. They eventually crossed paths with Jedi, and their battle began with a line of duels. Where a Jedi fell, a Sith fell. Troopers came in with support while Thrawn watched with pleasure. On the plains, rebel forces were being crushed hastily by Imperial units. Vader had enough of his toying around and landed behind the enemy lines near the Jedi Temple. He left his shuttle and lifted his cloak above his head and walked towards the temple. In the city, the Jedi began to get slaughtered. It wasn't their best nights, but they did some harm to some of but they did their harm to some of Vader's younglings, who had grown into great warriors in their first true test of combat. The plains battle was full of soot and ash, and from the rebel destruction rose a single Jedi. The Grand Inquisitor halted his troops and stepped before them and his Inquisitors. The Jedi Knight Kyle Katarn stood before him. The Grand Inquisitor hadn't much to say and ignited his blade for a true fight. As the two clashed, blades blue and red shone through the rebel. The Grand Inquisitor, in his age, was in far more than he thought he was, and his arrogance bested him. He was pushed to the ground, and instead of Kyle killing him, he felt a disturbance. The temple. He left the defeated Inquisitor on the ground. As the Grand Inquisitor gathered himself together, the Seventh Sister ignited her blade into his back. Taking command of the Inquisitors, she led them to follow Kyle. The Imperial army stopped and allowed the Sith to fight the Jedi. It wasn't their fight, and it wasn't their duty to finish the job for the Sith, so they prepared to return to their ships. Admiral Raddus's flagship had been destroyed, and blasts from the Death Star turned Home One, Admiral Akbar's ship, to pieces of metal floating in space. A full and complete victory all across the board. Anakin was incredible with a lightsaber, skilled beyond belief, powerful without a hint of weakness. Anakin moved like a blur, cutting through dozens of Jedi at a time. The Small Order had been built from nothing, and the remaining few hundred Jedi were now dying instantaneously. The Inquisitors arrived and stopped as they met Barriss and Pong and the other apprentices. They watched, as did Kyle. He couldn't move. Skywalker was unstoppable. Another two Jedi, one with a broken neck, and the other in two halves. They were all Padawans or knights, and sadly, they had to face Vader. This was an ego boost for sure, but Anakin did not let that go to his mind. He turned to see three more Jedi running at him, and let a wave of Force lightning evaporate their flesh as they groaned on the floor in pain, dying, withering away. Vader turned and saw another few Jedi. They moved away from him. They knew it was over. They tried to run, but Vader's use of the Force was unmatched. He stopped them with the Force and then drained their entire being. He did this with one hand. Pulling a lightsaber back out, he winged it across the hall, cutting the Jedi down. Vader moved quietly without beating his chest as he came across the first master in the Order, Kanan Jarrus. Their duel commenced, and it was a true match of blades. Vader wanted to toy around with the Jedi, but then his apprentice came. Kanan called to Ezra, telling him to stay back, but it wasn't enough. Vader pulled Ezra with the Force and grabbed him by the throat. Kanan harnessed the dark side to try and save his apprentice, and Vader smiled. He threw Ezra aside and focused on Kanan, mocking him, telling him that it gave him power and made him stronger, and telling him that all this time he could have joined Vader. Cutting Kanan down and then feeling a pain in his back, Ezra slashed Vader across the back. Vader was impressed, but it wasn't worth the effort. He seized Ezra's life essence and replenished the pain in his back, using Force Heal on himself and Force Drain on Ezra. Kyle, Koda, and the remaining 40 Jedi, which most of were masters, surrounded Anakin Skywalker. He knew that if he didn't act, he would be killed, so Vader knelt down as they approached, all ready to strike him down. Vader grinned. He picked them all up with the Force, and instead of killing them, he used Force Sever against the Jedi. Now he could torture them for eternity. They all fell to the ground as they tried to rise. They all at once collectively felt something different. They could no longer utilize the Force. They were nothing but normal beings, disconnected from the Force. It didn't stop the few who tried to fight for their lives. The few who were struck down by Vader one by one. One of the Inquisitors tried to strike down the Jedi, but were stopped by Vader. Without a beat, he crushed the windpipe of the Inquisitor, and they fell to the ground. Vader turned to the Inquisitors and told them that he would be taking the Jedi to Exegol until they became extinct. The rebellion was crushed, and he told them to return to serving the Empire. Skywalker put his cloak back over his head and walked away, through the rubble of dead bodies he had created on his way in. Before anyone could speak, Purge Troopers came in and took the Jedi, cuffing them one by one and putting them into shuttles back to Vader's flagship. If they resisted, they were killed. Now on the Death Star, a small group of rebels had breached the hangar bay, led by Saw Gerrera. Pong and Barriss were dispatched specifically by Darth Vader to kill them, their opportunity to shine once again after beating the Jedi on Lethal's capital. They landed on the Death Star and ripped the rebels limb from limb. The Imperial troopers in the hangar bay held stiff resistance, but the two apprentices of Vader's finished off the rebel insurgents. Upon Vader's return to Exegol, he felt a disturbance, not the Jedi, but something within his temple. The prophets wouldn't turn on him, would they? He hadn't foreseen this betrayal, but upon his arrival it was true. As he landed amongst the waste, he watched blades clash with blades, and prophets running. It was war, not just any war, the greatest war in the history of the Sith. All those relics he had acquired from his training, they were used to bring life to the Sith of the past, and they were creating a war upon each other. So much raw power at Vader's disposal. The most powerful beings in galactic history stood before him, warring for their rightful power in the galaxy. Vader saw coming before him, though, an apparition of Palpatine, but he had no time for his folly. Vader cut down Palpatine once again and made his way towards a brute of a Sith Lord, Sion. Vader's duel began with Lord Sion. Before any final blows could be dealt, Darth Traya came along to assist her former apprentice. For Anakin, 3 blades of Traya were no assignment, nor was facing Sion, but then he felt the presence of a Dark Lord approaching their combat. It was the Lord of Hunger. The deadliest trio of the Sith was now facing down the full power of Lord Vader. This was the truest test of Vader's ability, and this was the truest test since he fought the Jedi Council all those years ago on Coruscant. Vader, though, was like a blur. He moved at incredible speed, knocking down 2 of Traya's blades before he found himself striking blades with Sion, who towered over Anakin physically. Anakin took advantage of Sion's overconfidence, bringing his blade into Sion's chest, and then using Sion's blade to stab Traya in the left eye. The 2 Sith dropped lifelessly. Vader felt a pull. Nihilus abandoned the duel and started using Force Drain on Skywalker. Vader felt the essence of Force leaving his body, draining him to his knees, before he turned the Lord of Hunger against himself, by taking all of the Force essence from Nihilus and draining the Dark Lord, until a cloak and a mask fell to the floor without a body. Of course, Nihilus being a wound in the Force could corrupt Anakin's Force being, but Vader had no fear of this. The battle raged on. Vader would come to strike down Melek and find himself at a crossroads of the power of Revan and Bastilla, who stood before him. Vader respected the duo, but Vader had enough of history coming to life. Igniting his blade, he clashed hard against Revan. Purple and red was a sight to behold, but it didn't last, and neither did Bastilla. The great battle in Exegol taught Vader not to trust the prophets. He soon slaughtered the rest of them that were still alive, mercilessly and painfully, breaking bones, removing limbs, before he finished the kill. This was nothing compared to what he would do to the Jedi in due time. Imperial troopers were brought in at the request of Chancellor Krennic, and Vader's temple was rebuilt. It was a training ground for Sith, but also a laboratory. Vader would eventually create his first life. Down the road, Vader could create life as he pleased, and the Sith ruled the galaxy. The Death Star was always at his command, but the Empire ran smoother than the Republic, and any hint of the Jedi was reduced to ash. It was not that Vader was weak, but he had achieved power, and he was already the most powerful being in the galaxy, in the history of the galaxy, ever. Vader could foresee an apprentice attempting to kill him, or a coup within the Empire. Anything that could have affected him negatively, he could prevent instantaneously. Vader taught all of his lessons to Pong Krell. He was a worthy apprentice, and he was worthy of such knowledge. Barriss was too ignorant to lead the Sith down a path of victory, but Krell had manipulated the Jedi for long enough, and he was more capable of being the Sith to succeed Vader, though this wouldn't happen for another several decades. The story of Vader ends with the galaxy subservient to the Empire and with the Sith throughout the galaxy having achieved what it is that the Sith had always wanted, true power. Vader had achieved the goal, and now had a powerful Sith Order subservient to him and him alone. The galaxy would find itself in peace, and as Anakin reached his full potential, he continued to embrace himself in the Force, studying and experimenting, discovering new abilities and new powers, as he was unstoppable. After Anakin's death, the legacy of all who fell before him or to him vanished, as the galaxy would find itself bowing to a new Sith leader. Wow, our 4-part series is finally over, guys. I really hope you guys enjoyed this. I spent a lot of time on these. I hope you guys, like, this is really cool. I don't know. What do you guys think? Tell me what you guys think down below about what we got at the end of this series. Honestly, didn't expect it to go this far when I started so many months ago. I didn't even expect it to be as popular as it was so many months ago. So I'm so glad you guys really enjoyed this series. It's gonna be like an hour-long movie, so I hope you guys got your popcorn for the movie. But yeah, I mean, I honestly, once Maul and Savage are out of the picture, and Anakin having spent so much time with the Sith, I think it's reasonable that he would have become so powerful. And not only that, but he wasn't nearly as arrogant as the other Sith. He just wasn't. I mean, growing up with the Sith, yeah, he could have been, but he also was a slave at some point, and he did have resentment towards Palpatine for that. So, in some way, shape, or form, Anakin would have probably been a better Sith than any Sith ever. He would have probably been a gray Sith, if we're going to call it that, like the gray Jedi version of a Sith. But he really would have be vying for power. He already had all the power he needed. He could control the galaxy with a snap of the finger. So, I mean, I don't really see Vader vying for power. What happens after this is up to your imagination. Just like any good Star Wars movie, it's up to you to imagine what happens in our favorite galaxy far, far away. In my mind, I like to imagine that there will be a power fight for the leader of the Sith. I feel like Pong and Barriss would get into a big duel, and then whoever won would control the galaxy, but not control it like how Vader did it, and it would just kind of be a mess. But I hope you guys did enjoy this. As always, spread the love, subscribe if you want to win a free lightsaber, and I will see you guys in the next video. And always remember, may the Force be with you.